Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and I'm privileged to be joined today by one of our all-time favourite authors, Neal Stephenson. How are you, mate?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks for joining us. Scientist, geographer, multi-hyphenate author, and you're here to talk to us about your new novel, about which we're extremely excited, and you can order from the links attached to this conversation, Termination Shock. So,
Please do.
what can you tell me about Termination Shock, mate?
It's a techno-thriller that is about climate change and specifically about geoengineering. So it's set in the near future, and I don't want to give out a lot of spoilers, but the gist of it is that there's an individual who decides he's going to kind of take matters into his own hands to take some technological steps to intervene in climate change. And so it's partly about what that person does and how he does it, but more importantly, it's about what happens next, how various people react and respond to what this guy has done, depending on whether they think it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing for them.
Yeah, okay. And how did you come to create this novel? How did you access that? What was the genesis of it all?
Well, it just seemed to me that there really is nothing more important right now than climate change. It's just getting started. As bad as it is, and as global an impact as it's already had, it's really just getting warmed up. and and so it's going to be the dominant feature of our kind of political landscape and our cultural landscape in the next 100 years. And one of the things that makes it challenging to think about is that it's a very complicated thing on a technical scientific level. There's a lot of angles to it, a lot of details that even very highly trained scientists may have trouble kind of keeping in their heads all at once. And for better or worse, I seem to have found kind of a niche in my career as someone who writes books about stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be someone who takes technological and scientific themes and kind of talks about them in an approachable manner. And so it would seem a bit odd for me to, get to the end of my career, whenever that's going to be, without having written something about this topic. So that was when I decided to approach it, and then kind of the rest is details about the story I decided to tell and how to tell it.
Now, it would seem to me that you've really touched upon what is you occupy a very unique place, I think, in the sense that society really needs people like you who can take complex issues and actually deliver them in a way that's easily understandable to a larger audience. I mean, I've been sat in the middle of a kind of a domestic political issue for the last 3 or 4 years, like every other British person, which is essentially a very complex economic conversation, which has been rendered into a simple emotional yes or no vote, which of course you can't do. And once you do that, then catastrophe ensues, right?
Speaking of Brexit.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's absolutely right, absolutely right. Yeah. But as much as issues like Brexit and as much as Trump-era American politics are the things that consumers here and over in the States, actually, it would seem to me that while we're doing this marionette dance around all these kind of issues, the big thing that's staring us in the face is climate change. And that's the whole thing that's going to render a lot of these turf war conversations completely irrelevant. And I'm interested in how long have you been getting a sense that it's something that you wanted to engage with in novel form?
I like a lot of novelists, I tend to kind of go into a tunnel at the beginning of a project. Once I've committed to write something, I go into a tunnel for a couple of years until it's done. And it's not that I'm not paying attention to other things that are happening in the world. I read the paper and so on, like anyone else. But during that time, when I'm in that tunnel, I'm not necessarily construing all of that stuff as possible fodder for a book, because I'm a one thing at a time kind of guy. But then at some point, I finish a book, I emerge from that tunnel, and I look around and ask myself, okay, what's new? Like, I may have a docket in my head of possible book ideas that I might want to work on next, but you've got to refresh that docket from time to time based on what's actually happening. And so when that happened after the publication of Fall or Dodge in Hell, which is my previous book, I looked around and it just seemed to me that the climate change conversation had advanced to a point where it really needed a careful look. And that in particular, there are some peculiarities about how people talk about climate change, depending on their political framework, that seemed a bit odd to me. So there are certain, on both kind of the left and the right, there are certain things that one is not supposed to talk about. On the right, you're not even supposed to admit that climate change is a real thing at all, or you're supposed to say that it's overblown. And if you fail to toe that line, then you're condemned and excluded by people on the right. And on the left, there's a strong reluctance to consider technological approaches to this problem, because technology is seen as the way that we got into the problem in the first place. So how could more technology help if technology was the problem to begin with? And so it just looked to me as though the conversation was stuck there in a way that wasn't very productive, and it didn't really reflect my understanding of the underlying realities. And it just seemed like suddenly it was just obvious to me that I should write this book.
What are the challenges, do you think, to opening up the conversation in a meaningful way, given the fact that there is such a push to make it a simplistic and quite reductive conversation?
Well, part of it is just the same overriding problem that we've got everywhere with Brexit and so many other issues, which is that the way social media is just built in. It's got a built-in sort of incentive to polarize people and create these ludicrously simplified, cartoonish conversations. So that's kind of a global problem that's hurting us everywhere.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the things it leads to is a kind of an assumption that nobody's really arguing in good faith. And so when a person on the right hears someone on the other side talking about the danger of global warming, they don't take that at face value, but instead they say, oh, well, they're claiming to be all altruistic and everything, but what they're really doing is they're trying to take away my car. They want me to ride my bicycle to work in the rain. And people on the left, when they hear the people on the right kind of pushing back against that, again, they don't take that in good faith. They say, oh, well, what they're really doing, is acting as a shill for the oil companies or what have you. And so in that kind of atmosphere, it's almost impossible to have useful conversations, because all people are doing is they listen to what's being said by the other side. They say what they really mean is this other thing that's terrible and stupid. And so it kind of dissolves into ad hominem attacks and just bad faith argumentation.
So Neal, in a world where discourse and debate have broken down to the point where essentially you have two sets of people shouting what they believe at each other and not listening and just getting angry all the time, what do you feel is the way forward?
Well, all I can do is do what I do for a living, which is write books that perhaps through the medium of storytelling might be able to present a more complicated view of things. So that's kind of my personal answer. If if the question is broadened to include how can society change things, right now the picture has been looking pretty gloomy, but people are, I think, beginning to understand a little better what social media has done to us, and to consider ways that we might change that situation. I've been pushing a recent book, actually, I'll plug it right now, called The Constitution of Knowledge by Jonathan Rauch, which is sort of about this. He kind of dispassionately talks about how we got where we are and some ideas on how to change it. And I think, there's a considerable backlash going on right now, particularly just within the last few days, against Facebook. There have been some really damaging revelations that have come out just within the last week about Facebook and Instagram. And people are really beginning to see this as a social problem that calls for some systematic change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's very well said. And I think something you touched upon, which is absolutely true, is the power of the novel and of storytelling to actually reach people, and which it so often has throughout the 20th century, in a way that just straightforward news media can't. And sometimes embedding and ideas in and introducing ideas through the medium of storytelling, that's actually how they develop on a grassroots basis, and that's how they embed themselves into people's consciousness. And I think that's something you've got a history of doing, which you touched upon.
It can be a bit tricky because that's all true, and yet when a reader picks up a book and begins reading it and begins to detect that the author has an axe to grind or a particular agenda to set, then immediately the book is closed and chucked away and sort of consigned to the scrap pile. And so it can be a somewhat tricky business in that if it comes to seem as though a particular agenda is being pushed, then the suspension of disbelief, which is key to storytelling, is destroyed. The book is no longer enjoyable to read. So hopefully I've figured out that balance, at least for some number of readers.
Yeah, I think it's undoubtedly true that you have. And with regard to Termination Shock, I'm sure that's what everybody who's a fan of yours here at Forbidden Planet among our reader base, that's why they're so much looking forward to the novel. With regard to your career as a novelist, I was amazed to realise when I was prepping for this interview that Snow Crash was basically 30 years ago.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe that. I'm sure for you, I know you're a very prolific creator, but that must have been 30 years in a creation heartbeat, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, it was written more than 30 years ago. It came out. Yeah, it came out in 92. I wrote it in 89, 90, 91. So yeah, and of course, it's a truism that the older you get, the faster time seems to go by. So so a lot has happened since then, and it does seem in some ways like something I just mailed off to the publisher a few weeks ago, because in those days you did literally mail physical documents around to the publisher instead of just hitting send on a PDF.
Yeah, no, right. And we publish a lot of comic books, and back in the day, you're getting beautiful artwork in the mail that an amazing artist would just, trust to the postal service. Yeah. And I would say that's one upside of modern technology, that these guys don't have to lose sight of the beautiful stuff they create. And indeed, I remember back in the day, how many mimeograph copies of a manuscript can you have, and the risk of losing stuff was a very real thing, right? I guess, everybody gets a crash on their laptop or whatnot nowadays, but things certainly have changed so massively in that span. And when you look back on that span, if somebody was new to your work, what would you say? What do you think are the books that are the purest distillation of what you've been trying to do creatively over that time, that you're the most satisfied with?
Well, I get that question from time to time, and I guess I'll give you my stock answer, which is that, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the important thing is suspension of disbelief and sort of getting into the book and enjoying the book. Because if that doesn't happen, you're not drawn in, then you can't possibly enjoy the experience of reading the book. And that is different for different people. So I mean, Snow Crash is an obvious answer that I can give to people, but some may not care for the tone and the style of, you know, a book that is a cyberpunk novel that simultaneously is making fun of cyberpunk novels, right? So that may kind of not be a funny joke to everyone.
Yeah.
And so I usually ask people, you know, what do you generally read? What are books that you enjoy? And if the answer comes back that they like historical fiction, then I'll tend to steer them in the direction of Cryptonomicon or the Baroque cycle.
Yeah.
And if they're more readers of contemporary thrillers that, you know, have some techno elements, but don't read as science fiction per se, then I might aim them more towards Ream-D, or you know, a book that feels a little closer to our current reality.
Yeah, well said, I think. And I think the thing about your work is it is multi-level. So you not all authors can do that, can turn around and go, well, if you like this, try this, try this. Some people are just playing one very, very specifically, very successfully often. But I think that free-ranging nature of what you've done is very interesting.
Well, you know, I specifically remember an encounter that I had at Forbidden Planet when I was doing the book tour. I think it may have been the last book tour I ever did in the UK, sadly, which was, I think, for one of the Baroque cycle books. But a gentleman came up to me at the end of the reading and was chatting with me about Quicksilver, and was surprised to learn that I had written science fiction books. So in this guy's mind, he had just somehow come across Quicksilver and read it and he liked it enough that he showed up for the event at Forbidden Planet. But to him, I was a guy who had recently written a historical fiction book, and he was surprised that I had another career. And so I try to think of him and of other readers like him when addressing this topic, because everyone's different. Everyone's got their own, as you know, being in the book selling business, everyone's got their own favorite writer, favorite style of book. Yeah. And you've got to work with that as a bookseller.
Of course. Well, I think as a creator, as a novelist, it must be quite refreshing to be able to click into, to switch genres in the way that you have, if you're capable of doing that, which not everybody is. Somebody that your career has always reminded me of, and this might seem like a nonsensical analogy when I say it, is Lawrence Bloch, the noir writer, because he is able to move, actually quite fluidly change genres. You know, from most of his work's being noir, but he does romance, he does comedy, you know, and that's. While he's most famous for the noir stuff, for the crime stuff, he moves around quite seamlessly, often using different aliases, and he reminds me of you in that respect.
Interesting. I'm not familiar with his work, but it's particularly interesting that he's gone into romance, because that always has seemed, it's a hugely popular genre, but it doesn't seem like something you could kind of dip into. But good for him.
No, right on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just close out by having a quick word about a book that you mentioned, Cryptonomicon. And how did you first become exposed to Alan Turing and his work and the Second World War cryptography? How did you come across that?
Well, I mean, like many people, I had read accounts of that stuff that began coming out when it was made public. So it was secret until I can't remember the.
In my mind, I'm thinking it was like the late 70s or something when
Yeah,
the Enigma
that's
stuff came
kind of what
out.
I
Yeah.
thought. Yeah, several decades,
Yeah.
and then it was kind of a bombshell when it came out. And so I was aware of it, and then what had happened was that I had been kind of because of Snow Crash and the Diamond Age and the readership that those books had developed sort of down in the Bay Area tech industry. I had come to know people working in that industry, and particularly some people who were interested in money. I mean, everyone's interested in money, but they were interested in the technology of money and what we now call cryptocurrency. And they called themselves the cipher punks as opposed to the cyber punks. And so I was just kind of immersed in that and got interested in their culture and their way of thinking, and so I had come up with some ideas around that and around money, and I had a vague idea of the character who eventually became Enoch Root, and so I just hit on the idea of writing a split time book where part of it happens in the Second World War and concerns all of the events that you mentioned, Turing, and Turing's actually a character, and Bletchley Park and everything that happened related to the Code Wars. And the other part is modern day and features the kinds of people I was just talking about, and how they kind of interact across generations. So I visited Bletchley Park and some of the other sites that were important to that story. And I also, at the same time, had been hired to write an article for Wired about submarine cables. And so that exposed me to a lot of nitty-gritty detail about how communications networks work, and where are the choke points in global communications. And so it all just kind of came together into that project during the late 1990s, basically.
Yeah, and it came together beautifully. Anybody who's watching this, you've got to pick up Termination Shock, which you can order from the links attached to this conversation. But if you've never read Cryptonomicon, you've got to pick it up. It's an amazing piece of work, and it really is, mate. And thank you very much for your time today. Oh yeah, all right, there we go.
So that's the cover of the I think it's the paperback, or it might have been the hardcover and paperback, but it's my favorite cover. And what you're seeing there is it's the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
But it's reflected in the polished bars of a glockenspiel.
Yeah.
So it's just a brilliant.
It's lovely
cover design, and that's why I've put it where it is.
That's great. Is it right? So it's just right by your work desk. Are you coming at me from where you write from as well, Neal?
Yeah, I sort of go back and forth between a laptop that's over there where I stand up, and a PC that's where I'm talking to you now. It's got better internet.
That is a beautiful piece of work, and it's a great novel. Prometheus Hall of Fame winner as well, and that's a book that Cryptonomicon is. All of your work is tremendous interest at the store, as you know, and from when you come visit and you do your readings and whatnot, how much everybody embraces Forbidden Planet, what you do. But yeah, that's a real favorite. It's a real favorite of mine as well, brother. It's a great book.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate your kind comments about it.
And
much appreciated.
Oh yeah, it's really, the pleasure is all mine, and it's great to speak to you about Termination Shock. I love the fact that you're embracing and approaching something that is so key and needs writing about sensibly. And if I could ask for anything from the world, it would be more sensible voices talking about and writing about climate change.
And everybody wants it. It's just.
I mean, our political leaders, for want of a better, I don't like to use the word leader when describing those people, but the people we have running our countries in the West at the moment, with some exceptions, are an absolute shower. And it's one of the things that we have in common on both sides of the Atlantic, of course.
Yeah, there's another one by Anne Applebaum. I had to come up with a bibliography of books like this for another. It's Anne Applebaum. It's about it's called The Twilight. It's depressing title, The Twilight of Democracy. It's about the rise of authoritarianism. She starts in Poland and Hungary, which she knows about personally because she lived there. But then she moves on and applies those lessons to both the UK and the US.
I am 100% checking that out. Anne Applebaum, I'll get it done. Well, I'll end on a more upbeat note, which is Termination Shock. It is a great book. Everybody should be checking it out, and it's published in November, I believe, but it's available for order right here, right now. Thanks for joining us, Neal, and I very much look forward to you come back and joining us at the store when we get, when international travel becomes a safe thing to do.
When it's sorted. Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, me neither. Take care, brother. I'll see you soon. All the best.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.